The other thing I would say, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, is the systems for protecting us are fairly weak. There's deficiencies in the regulations. There's large gaps in the regulatory authority of the government agencies designed to protect you. A lot of essentially lack of resources. Quite often the laws might work, but there's nobody really to implement them. And then the whole issue of just this is moving very quickly. As I say, we've seen a doubling of products in less than 14 months. Can the government keep up with this? This is some work we've done with UMass Lowell. This was a direct quote from a safety manager in a firm here in Massachusetts. We don't really understand what regulatory requirements might be applicable to nanotech. A lot of the regulations were not designed when nanotech even existed. They were designed 30, 40, 50, in some cases 100 years ago. And we're trying to apply them, obviously, to a very new technology. There's people that think that we need some more regulation. This was a piece in the New York Times sort of bemoaning the lack of regulatory clarity around biotech. And it's actually having an impact on the willingness of people to invest in biotech. Here's the Food and Drug Administration. The Food and Drug Administration regulates 25% of the U.S. GDP. So they're the gorilla on the block in terms of who regulates what. Starting with all cosmetics, whole foods, supplements, food ingredients, additives, food packaging, and then obviously what they're known most for are drugs and biomedical devices. They have both tools they can use before stuff comes into the market, pre-market, and after it comes in, if it's causing problems. The black areas are areas where they have virtually no authority. Now the interesting thing is the areas they have no authority are also the areas where most nano products are appearing right now, in areas of cosmetics and dietary supplements. Less of a problem around drugs and biomedical devices. There's about 15 drugs and biomedical devices on the market right now that are nano-engineered. There's hundreds more in the clinical pipeline. So these, you'll begin to see these kind of trickle out over the next few years. This is the one that people forget about. There's a huge argument. Well, will the regulations work? Won't they work? It doesn't really matter if you don't have the resources to do anything. If you can't enforce, you can't inspect, you don't have the resources or the expertise to test this stuff. So let me just show you what's going on with the agencies. The EPA's budget today is less than the EPA's budget was in 1973. They don't have a lot of money. And of course, their mandate is exploded. Food and Drug Administration, FDA's budget is around 50% what it had in 1996. So these agencies have been systematically cut back. Consumer Product Safety Commission, one of the sleeper agencies, it's in a little nondescript building in Bethesda, Maryland. They oversee 15,000 products, product lines, with 400 people. When they were started, there was about 1,000 people. They're down to 400. They only have one person to test toys. One person. Okay. So I want you to think a little bit about the last 7 months. And on October 4th, the CPSC recalled 500,000 toys in the U.S. for violating the lead paint standard. We thought we'd essentially gotten lead out of our environment. All of those toys were made in China. You go back a few more months, we had rat poison in pet food, again from China. And we had diethylene glycol, which is essentially an antifreeze additive, appear in our toothpaste. Again, that's the FDA, not CPSC. So we were in a situation where we're unable really to deal with some of the most basic toxins. The pernicious effects of lead have been known since 2000 BC, and yet they're coming into the marketplace. The important thing to remember here is an awful lot of the nano products are being made in China, increasingly. Pacific Rim, China, Korea, and they will come across our borders. OSHA, these are the people that end up in the workplace to protect workers, again, eviscerated over the past 10 years or so. The thing is, you don't really have to change laws to limit oversight. You just cut budgets. And I can do this at a federal level, I can do it at a state level, I can do it at a local level. And these are the people that essentially are out there supposedly protecting us. Okay, let me turn now to sort of the bulk here of what we've done on public awareness. We've done numerous national polls. We've done over 30 hours of focus groups. So we actually know a lot about how people are sort of feeling about nanotech. This is, I think, one of the most interesting findings from 2 national polls. 70–80% of the people in the polls have heard nothing or very little about nanotech. The nano awareness meter hasn't moved a nanometer in a year. No change whatsoever. Despite the fact that obviously there's products on the market, there's a lot of people trying to doing work on education, it just isn't sinking in. One of my quotes from Carl Sagan, which I think is a truism, probably all the science teachers here know this one, is we're very dependent on science and tech. We don't know much about it. And nanotech is no exception. We ask people where they hear about nanotech, if they have heard about it. Discovery Channel comes up high, news programs, NPR, quite often friends and family, the internet. These are sort of the main sources that people will tell us about. When we start out in a lot of these focus groups and polls, we don't give people any information. We just assume we ask them, how do you feel, okay, about this? We don't know whether they've heard about it or not. This is kind of pre-information stage. 50% said, how should I know? Not sure, never heard about it. Interestingly enough, people, regardless of whether they know or they don't know, will take a stand. Right? We're all familiar with that, right? Based on no information and probably total ignorance, 25% think the benefits and risks will be about equal. The risks are going to outweigh the benefits, and the benefits will outweigh the risks. After that, we give them information. We give them basic stuff that's gone through sort of scientific peer review. This is pretty basic stuff. What is it? Nanometer, scale. Then we test them again. A lot of the people that weren't sure then take a stand. Benefits are going to outweigh the risk, 30%. Risk will outweigh the benefits. And about 40% are kind of, not sure yet. Now, the interesting thing that happens is when we start breaking these people down is you start to see some very interesting effects. One is called the white male effect. White guys just like risks, or they're willing to take risks. There's a huge difference we find between women and men, actually even after they become informed. And there's a lot of risk research going back years now that sort of says there is a white male effect. There's a study in the 1990s that just looked at men and women toxicologists. These are people that are trained to sort of analyze risks. And again, correcting for all kinds of variables, they found a significant gender difference. So there is this interesting difference. Education helps as people become, again, in this red area, more educated. They tend to believe the benefits are going to outweigh the risks. And there's also a correlation with income, which may be tied into education. But again, when you break this down, you start to see some very, I think, interesting effects across gender, across socioeconomic status, that sort of thing. It also tells us we're going to have a very different message depending on who we're talking to. I mean, this is one of the reasons we've tried to get our message into women's magazines or medical, someplace where other kinds of people will be listening to it. So the other thing I would say, last year we did a whole set of focus groups just with women in nano and cosmetics. Right now, given the product mix that's in the marketplace and the one that's coming, which will be food, it might be women will be making a lot of the purchases of these first-generation nano products. Once people learn, they tend to be somewhat skeptical. These are direct quotes from focus groups we ran about a year and a half ago. We did one in Spokane, Washington, another one in Texas. Now the genie's out of the bottle. I worry about controlling it. There's always this worry about things are moving too fast, government can't keep up with it. There's this worry about, I call it the Trojan horse effect. We're going to sort of let this technology into society, and then 20 years from now, somebody's going to figure out, oh, that wasn't a good idea. The same way we had problems with asbestos. And there's a lot of, I think, really kind of savvy observations about regulation and whether the regulations are going to work or not. And I think the biggest thing people say is, why isn't anybody talking about this? And once they actually find out something about it, and they realize the level of investment by the government, the products on the market, they sort of say, well, why aren't we hearing about this? So I think that's one of the main messages we get. The other thing we constantly test is, how do people feel about, do they trust the people that might be either making this or overseeing it? So we ask them about, how confident they are in these particular parties being able to maximize benefits and minimize risks of just general scientific advance. This is the Department of Agriculture, FDA, Environmental Protection Agency, and businesses and companies. Actually, it goes below this. At the bottom is the White House, and right above that is the Congress. And above that is our press and journalists, sort of, and reporting stuff. And this varies. I mean, when we did the focus groups, we talked to people about their trust in FDA right after the Vioxx scare. And trust levels were real down. So this tends to be quite often linked to issue awareness cycles. But generally, the government does come up higher, always higher than businesses. This was an interesting, some work we're doing with something called the Cultural Cognition Project, which is run out of Yale. And we tried to sort of ask the question, well, does information really help people? Does it sort of get them to the point where they feel more accepting of this technology or more trusting? And what we found out is it really depends a lot. So what you're seeing there is no info and with info, and sort of this is kind of a scale of trust. And you can see what happens with more info if you look at race. So, you know, telling people more about Nano just drives their trust into the seller. You see, again, the gender effect. More info actually boosts it with males. That's the black line. Drops it with females. The red line here is these are the Democrats, and these are the Republicans. And then we do some stuff on ideology, you know, whether people see them as liberals or whatnot. So the message here, again, is that this is very complicated, actually, in terms of messaging. And, of course, there's always been this theory, I think, in the scientific community is if the public just understood what we were doing, you know, they would be on board with this. Well, that's not going to work here at all. In fact, telling them more information may actually make it worse. Depends on, you know, who gives them the information and how they feel about it. The messenger has a huge impact. The other thing that we found about the public's expectations, they're incredibly consistent. There's almost no public support for shutting Nano down. We asked people, shut, moratorium? No, we're not interested in that. We think there's a lot of promise here. They're also very suspicious of industry kind of regulating themselves on this issue. It's not surprising. When we ask what basically would boost public confidence in nanotech, we don't get 20 recommendations. We always get the same 3. Okay? And that's, they want transparency and disclosure. If you're doing something, tell us about it. We don't want to be surprised. They like the idea of more pre-market testing. In other words, don't use the public as a guinea pig. We'd like you to do more testing upstream before you put these things into the marketplace. And they like the idea of third-party testing by Underwriters Lab, Consumers Union. You know, Consumers Union has gotten pretty involved. If you haven't seen it, the July issue of Consumers Reports has a very good article on nanotech. And it also contains tests of a number of nano sunscreens. So it's definitely on the radar screen of Consumers Reports. But I think the good thing is that, again, people converge around, I think, what are a fairly strong set of rational expectations, given the fact that we're dealing with a new technology that might have some inherent risks. Waiting for that killer app, you know. So we asked people, what do you think would really change the debate here? If we're investing billions of dollars, what would you like to see it invested in? You know, is it the wrinkle-free pants, you know, the stain-resistant tie, the golf ball that takes the slice out of your hit? Most people don't really get too excited about that. They tend to focus on medical advances, environment, national security applications. But again, the killer app for Nano hasn't come out yet. And so people are kind of on the fence. It's sort of, why are we spending all this money? What is it? I mean, what's the goal here? And you know, they're still waiting, again, for this kind of killer app. And the science community talks a lot about what's going to happen. But you know, 70 to 80% of what the science community talks about is not going to make it into the operating room or onto market shelves because it's just a long way between research and market. So again, I'm focusing on what's out there. And this is, I think, an interest. The public tells us incredibly important things. I mean, every time, when I do focus groups, I usually take a bunch of scientists and sit them behind the one-way mirror and just have them listen to the way people talk. They're incredibly perceptive. They'll get the science very quickly. It's not at a deep level. They understand the oversight system. They're incredibly articulate about what they think should happen and the role of what their expectations are around government and industry and NGOs and who should do what. So you have all the makings there essentially for a new social contract between the public and science around nanotech. It's an incredible opportunity, actually, if we take advantage of it.